I was folding Michael's old baby clothes, preparing them for donation, when my phone rang at 2:47 a.m. The shrill sound cut through the silence of my Connecticut home like a knife. My heart lurched as I fumbled for the device, knowing that nothing good ever came from calls at this hour. "Mrs. Henderson?" The voice was professional but strained. "This is Dr. Sarah Collins from Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Your son Michael has been admitted to our intensive care unit."
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
The baby onesie slipped from my hands as the room tilted. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's in critical condition, ma'am. We need his medical power of attorney holder here immediately. Are you listed as his healthcare proxy?" My mind raced back to 3 years ago when Michael had asked me to sign some papers. "Just in case, Mom," he'd said with that sheepish smile I knew so well. "You know how paranoid I am about having all my documents in order." Thank God for his paranoia. "Yes, I am. I'll be there as soon as possible." "Mrs. Henderson, he's asking for you." Those 5 words shattered something inside me. I threw clothes into a bag with trembling hands, my maternal instincts screaming as I tried not to think about what critical condition meant for my 34-year-old son. The drive to Manhattan felt endless. Every red light an eternity. Every mile marker a reminder of how far I was from him. Michael had always been careful about his health. Even as a child, he'd been the one to remind me about doctor's appointments, to ask questions about medications. The idea of him lying helpless in a hospital bed made my chest tight with panic. I arrived at Mount Sinai as the first hints of dawn crept across the sky. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed conversations. When I finally saw him, my knees nearly buckled. My vibrant, strong son was connected to more tubes and wires than I could count, his face pale and swollen. "He had a severe allergic reaction," Dr. Collins explained quietly beside me. "His throat closed completely. If the paramedics had arrived even 5 minutes later, she didn't need to finish." "Where's his wife?" I asked, suddenly realizing that in all the chaos, I hadn't seen Stephanie anywhere. Dr. Collins checked her clipboard. "We called the emergency contact number. A woman answered and said she'd be here, but that was 6 hours ago." 6 hours. My son had been fighting for his life for 6 hours, and his wife was nowhere to be found. I pulled out my phone and called Stephanie's number. It went straight to voicemail. "I'm staying with him," I told the doctor, settling into the uncomfortable chair beside Michael's bed. "I'm not leaving." Over the next several hours, I watched monitors, spoke to nurses, and held my son's hand while machines breathed for him. I called Stephanie repeatedly. No answer. I texted her. Nothing. By afternoon, desperation drove me to check her social media. What I found made my blood freeze. Posted 4 hours ago. A perfectly curated photo of Stephanie in a stunning emerald gown, champagne glass raised, standing in what was clearly a hotel ballroom. The caption read, "Amazing night at the Metropolitan Children's Foundation Gala. So grateful to support such an important cause. Blessed Life, Charity Gala, NYC." She was 12 blocks away, 12 blocks from her dying husband, drinking champagne and posing for photos. I stared at the image until my eyes burned. In the background of her photo, I could see other couples, elegant tables, a live band. She looked radiant, carefree, completely at ease. Not like a woman whose husband was fighting for his life. Another post appeared as I watched. "Dancing the night away. Life is beautiful." This one showed her laughing with a tall man I didn't recognize, his hand resting familiarly on her waist. My hands shook as I scrolled through more photos. Hour after hour of celebration while Michael lay unconscious. The timestamp on her last post was just 20 minutes ago. A nurse appeared beside me. "Mrs. Henderson, we've been trying to reach his wife about some treatment decisions. Do you know how to contact her?" I looked down at my phone, then at my son's pale face, then back at the screen showing Stephanie's glittering night out. "She's unavailable," I said quietly. "But I have medical power of attorney. Whatever he needs, you have my authorization." The nurse nodded and left. I sat there in the sterile silence, listening to the ventilator breathe for my child, while his wife danced 12 blocks away. Something cold and hard was forming in my chest, a feeling I'd never experienced before. As I held Michael's limp hand, Watching his chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, one thought kept circling through my mind. I had rushed to New York to find my son gasping for air in the ICU. His wife was drinking champagne at a gala. That night, I called my lawyer. Hours later, her name would vanish from every account she thought was hers. This wasn't just neglect. This was abandonment. And I was about to discover it was only the beginning of Stephanie's betrayal. 2 weeks passed before I truly understood what I was dealing with. I had moved into a small hotel room 6 blocks from Mount Sinai, abandoning my life in Connecticut to maintain a constant vigil over Michael. The doctors said familiar voices and presence could help his recovery, so I read to him, played his favorite music, and talked about everything and nothing while machines kept him stable. Stephanie finally appeared on day 3, sweeping into the ICU like she was gracing a red carpet. She wore a designer coat I'd never seen before and carried flowers that looked expensive. 2 nurses looked up as she entered, and I caught the subtle eye roll one gave the other. "Oh, Michael, honey," she said, her voice pitched perfectly for the audience of medical staff. "I'm so sorry I couldn't get here sooner. The traffic from the charity event was absolutely horrible, and then I had to handle some urgent family matters." She kissed his forehead theatrically, then turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret, thank you for staying with him. You really didn't need to do that. I'm here now." The assumption that I would leave now that she'd arrived stung, but I simply nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. Family support is so important." Over the following days, I watched Stephanie's routine with growing unease. She would arrive around noon, usually with coffee and pastries for herself, never thinking to bring anything for me despite my obvious exhaustion. She'd spend exactly 2 hours in Michael's room, during which she took selfies with him unconscious in the background, updated her social media about being a devoted wife during this difficult journey, and made phone calls about various social engagements. "I know this sounds shallow," she'd say loudly enough for the nurses to hear, "but maintaining some normalcy is how I cope with the stress." Michael would want me to keep living. Then she'd leave for dinner plans, spa appointments, or shopping trips, always with the same explanation. "I'll be back first thing tomorrow. The doctors say consistency is key, and my morning visits give him something to look forward to." But I was there for the morning visits. Michael was still unconscious. There was nothing for him to look forward to. On the 10th day, I decided to dig deeper into what felt increasingly wrong. While Stephanie was out getting her nails done, I started going through Michael's personal belongings that the paramedics had brought in: his wallet, phone, and a small stack of mail that had been sitting on his kitchen counter. His phone was locked, but the mail told a story that made my stomach turn. 3 medical bills marked past due in red letters. A notice from his health insurance company about a lapsed policy. A letter from his primary care physician's office stating that his account was in collections. My son, who had always been meticulous about his finances and health, was drowning in medical debt. Yet Stephanie was carrying $1,000 handbags and posting photos from expensive restaurants. I called Michael's insurance company from the hospital cafeteria, using my power of attorney to access his account information. "Mrs. Henderson, I see you're listed as his healthcare proxy," the representative said. "I'm afraid Mr. Henderson's policy was terminated 3 months ago due to non-payment of premiums." 3 months ago? But his wife assured me everything was handled. "Our records show that Mrs. Henderson called to cancel the automatic payment system in January. She said they were switching to a different provider." My hands started shaking. Did she provide a reason? She mentioned that they were restructuring their finances and would handle payments manually going forward. Unfortunately, no manual payments were ever received. I hung up feeling sick. Stephanie had deliberately canceled Michael's health insurance while he was dealing with increasing health problems. The severe allergic reaction that nearly killed him should have been covered. Instead, the mounting bills were destroying his credit. That evening, I confronted her as gently as I could manage. "Stephanie, I'm concerned about Michael's insurance situation. I spoke with the company today." Her face went white, then red. "Margaret, I really don't think you should be involving yourself in our private financial matters. His medical bills are piling up. I'm trying to understand what happened." "What happened," she said, her voice turning sharp, "is that medical insurance in this country is a scam. We decided to self-pay because the premiums were ridiculous. Self-pay with what money? He has 3 past due bills already. That's temporary. I'm handling it. But she wasn't handling it. Over the next few days, I discovered that she'd not only canceled his insurance, but had also been diverting money from their joint account for her personal expenses. The bank statements I found in his belongings showed a pattern that made me physically ill. While Michael was working extra shifts to cover what he thought were increased insurance premiums, Stephanie was spending thousands on clothes, spa treatments, and weekend trips with friends. She'd been lying to him about the insurance costs while secretly canceling the coverage and pocketing the money. The cruelest discovery came when I found a letter he'd written but never sent, buried in his bedside table. It was addressed to me, dated 6 months ago. Mom, I don't know what to do. I'm having health problems that are getting worse. But every time I want to see a doctor, Stephanie reminds me how expensive it is without good insurance. She says we need to save money for the future, for kids someday. But I'm scared something serious is wrong, and I don't want to be a burden to anyone. My son had been suffering in silence, afraid to seek medical care because his wife had convinced him they couldn't afford it, while she spent their money on luxury items and social activities. I sat in that sterile hospital room, watching machines breathe for my child, and realized that his near-death experience wasn't just bad luck or a random medical emergency. It was the predictable result of months of delayed care, because the woman who was supposed to love him had been systematically stealing his healthcare money. When I looked up, Stephanie was standing in the doorway, perfectly made up and carrying shopping bags. She'd been at Saks Fifth Avenue while her husband fought for his life. "Any change today?" she asked casually, as if inquiring about the weather. I stared at her, seeing her clearly for the first time. This wasn't a grieving wife overwhelmed by circumstances. This was a predator who had been slowly draining my son's resources while endangering his health. "No change," I said quietly, but that was about to change. Everything was about to change. That night, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer in Connecticut. The second was to my accountant. By morning, I would know exactly what legal options I had to protect my son from the woman who was supposed to be protecting him. Stephanie had made a fatal error. She'd forgotten that the power of attorney she'd dismissed so casually gave me more than just medical decision-making authority. It gave me access to everything. And what I was about to discover would destroy the carefully constructed life she'd built on my son's suffering. 1 month after the crisis began, I was no longer the same woman who had frantically driven to New York in the middle of the night. The constant worry had carved new lines around my eyes, but something else had emerged from the exhaustion. A cold, methodical determination to uncover the full extent of what Stephanie had done to my son. My lawyer, Robert Chen, arrived at the hospital on a gray Tuesday morning, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who had seen too many family betrayals. We met in the small consultation room near the ICU, where families received devastating news about loved ones. "Margaret, I've reviewed the power of attorney documents you sent me," he said, spreading papers across the small table. "The good news is that Michael was very thorough when he established these. You have comprehensive authority over his medical and financial affairs while he's incapacitated. And the bad news? What his wife has been doing could constitute financial elder abuse, even though Michael isn't technically elderly. The pattern of isolating him from financial decisions while misappropriating funds for personal use fits the legal definition perfectly." I handed him the stack of documents I'd been collecting. There's more, much more. Over the past week, I'd been systematically going through everything Michael had stored in his bedside drawer, his laptop bag, and even his car, which was still in the hospital parking garage. What I found painted a picture of systematic manipulation that went back almost 2 years. Robert examined the bank statements first, his frown deepening as he traced the pattern of withdrawals. These ATM receipts show she was taking cash from their joint account almost daily. Small amounts, but they add up to thousands per month. "Look at the dates," I said, pointing to the timeline I'd created. Every withdrawal corresponds to her social media posts about shopping trips, spa days, or dinners out with friends. He flipped through printouts of her Instagram and Facebook posts. She documented her spending publicly while telling him they needed to cut back on medical expenses. It gets worse. I showed him the folder of documents I'd found in Michael's car. Hidden under the passenger seat were copies of medical bills, insurance correspondence, and handwritten notes in Michael's careful script documenting conversations with Stephanie about money. March 15th, I read from one of his notes. Stephanie says we can't afford the specialist Dr. Martinez recommended. Insurance copay too high. We'll try to manage symptoms with over-the-counter medications. Robert's expression darkened. What kind of specialist? A cardiologist. Michael had been having chest pains and irregular heartbeat for months. The allergic reaction that nearly killed him was likely complicated by an undiagnosed heart condition. The next note was even more damning. March 30th. Asked Stephanie about using emergency fund for cardiac testing. She cried and said we might lose the apartment if we keep spending on medical bills. Promised to get second job to cover expenses. He was working extra shifts to pay for medical care that should have been covered by insurance, I said, my voice barely steady. Insurance that she had secretly canceled while convincing him the premiums had increased. Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying the timeline. Margaret, this goes beyond financial abuse. This is medical neglect that could have resulted in his death. I pulled out the most devastating discovery. A tablet that had been charging in Michael's kitchen when the paramedics arrived. Stephanie had apparently forgotten about it, and the message history told a story that broke my heart. These are text exchanges between Michael and his supervisor at work, I explained. Look at this one from 2 weeks before his collapse. Robert read aloud. Hey, Mike, you looked pretty rough during the morning meeting. Everything okay? You should probably see a doctor. Michael's response, can't afford it right now. Stephanie and I are saving for some major expenses, just need to push through until things settle down. But Stephanie wasn't saving for major expenses. During that same 2-week period, her credit card statements showed charges at luxury boutiques, expensive restaurants, and a weekend spa retreat that cost more than Michael's monthly salary. The most disturbing part, I continued, is this conversation I found between Stephanie and her sister. The text thread was damning in its casual cruelty. Stephanie's sister had written, "How's Mike feeling? You mentioned he's been having health issues." Stephanie's response, "He's being dramatic as usual. Men always think they're dying when they have a little chest pain. I'm not feeding into his hypochondria by running to doctors for every little thing." Her sister, "But what if it's serious?" Stephanie, "Then it's serious. We can't control everything. And I'm not going to let his paranoia about health problems ruin our quality of life. I work hard for my money and I deserve to enjoy it." Robert set down the tablet with a disgusted shake of his head. She was actively discouraging him from seeking medical care while spending the money that should have covered his treatment. "There's more evidence of the relationship I suspected," I said, pulling out phone records. "Look at these calls and texts to a number that's not in Michael's contact list." The pattern was clear. Multiple daily conversations with someone named Derek, including late-night calls while Michael was working his extra shifts. The messaging app showed photos that Stephanie had sent to this Derek person, including pictures of expensive gifts with messages like, "Look what I bought myself today," and "Life is good when you know how to manage your finances." She'd been flaunting her financial manipulation to another man, while her husband worked himself into a medical crisis, trying to pay for necessities she'd convinced him they couldn't afford. "Margaret, I need to ask you something important," Robert said. "Are you prepared for this to destroy their marriage? Because once we move forward with protecting Michael's assets, there's no going back." I thought about my son lying in that hospital bed, machines breathing for him because he'd been too afraid to seek medical care. I thought about the stress he'd endured, working extra shifts while battling health problems, all because the woman who promised to love and protect him had been systematically betraying him. Robert, she almost killed him. She canceled his insurance, stole his healthcare money, and discouraged him from seeing doctors while she lived like a queen. If their marriage survives this, it was never a real marriage to begin with. He nodded grimly. "Then let's discuss your options. The power of attorney gives you immediate authority to freeze joint accounts, remove her as beneficiary on his life insurance and retirement accounts, and authorize any medical treatments without her input. How quickly can we move?" "The financial protections can be implemented within 48 hours. I'll need to coordinate with his bank, insurance companies, and employer. The beauty of the documents Michael signed is that they're already in effect. We're not changing anything. We're simply activating authorities that have existed for 3 years. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Michael's paranoia about having proper documentation would be the very thing that protected him from Stephanie's predatory behavior. What about the evidence of financial abuse? We'll document everything and file reports with the appropriate authorities. But Margaret, our priority has to be protecting Michael's immediate interests. The criminal aspects can be pursued later. Over the next several hours, Robert walked me through the process of securing Michael's finances. His savings account would be frozen to prevent further unauthorized withdrawals. Stephanie would be removed as beneficiary on his life insurance policy and 401k. Most importantly, his health insurance would be reinstated retroactively, covering the mounting medical bills. She's going to notice these changes, Robert warned. Good. Let her try to explain to Michael why she's upset about him having health insurance and financial security. As Robert left to begin the legal processes, I sat in the consultation room feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not just hope for Michael's recovery, but hope that justice might actually be possible. That evening, I returned to Michael's room to find Stephanie there, looking agitated as she scrolled through her phone. She glanced up when I entered, her expression more hostile than I'd ever seen it. Margaret, I think we need to discuss boundaries. I understand you're concerned about Michael, but you're interfering in matters that aren't your business. My son's welfare is absolutely my business. Your son is my husband. I make the decisions about his care and our finances. I smiled at her, a calm, cold smile that seemed to unnerve her. Actually, Stephanie, you don't. Michael made me his healthcare proxy and gave me power of attorney 3 years ago. While he's incapacitated, I make those decisions. The color drained from her face. That's just for emergencies. This is an emergency, and tomorrow you're going to discover just how much authority I actually have. As I settled into my chair beside Michael's bed, I saw something that might have been fear flicker across Stephanie's face. She gathered her things quickly and left without her usual theatrical goodbye kiss. She was right to be afraid. In less than 24 hours, her carefully constructed life of luxury built on my son's suffering was going to come crashing down. 6 weeks after Michael's collapse, I sat in the bank's private conference room watching Stephanie's world systematically dismantle itself. Robert had orchestrated everything with the precision of a surgeon, and today was the day we would implement the protections that should have been in place all along. Mrs. Henderson, I have the insurance reinstatement confirmation, said Janet Morrison from Michael's employer's HR department, sliding documents across the polished table. His health coverage has been retroactively restored to January 1st. All outstanding medical bills will be processed through the insurance company. The relief was overwhelming. 3 months of crushing medical debt would be erased, and Michael's future treatment would be covered. But more importantly, the financial pressure that had been slowly killing my son was gone. There's something else, Janet continued. When we investigated the insurance cancellation, we discovered that Mrs. Henderson called our benefits line in December, claiming to be acting on Michael's behalf. She provided his Social Security number and employee ID, which allowed her to make changes to his benefits. Changes that Michael never authorized, Robert noted, making careful notes. Exactly. She reduced his life insurance coverage from $500,000 to $50,000. And named herself as the sole beneficiary, removing you as the primary beneficiary that Michael had originally designated. My blood went cold. She was positioning herself to benefit from his death. It appears that way. The timing is particularly concerning because she made these changes just 2 weeks before she canceled his health insurance. Robert looked up from his notes. Janet, do you have recorded calls from that conversation? Yes. We record all benefits changes for quality assurance. Mrs. Henderson specifically asked about policies regarding terminal illness and accelerated death benefits. She seemed very interested in how quickly life insurance payouts are processed. The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear. Stephanie hadn't just been stealing money and denying Michael medical care. She'd been systematically positioning herself to profit from his death while making that death more likely by eliminating his healthcare coverage. Margaret, Robert said quietly, This moves us into criminal territory. This isn't just financial abuse anymore. The next item on our agenda was Michael's savings account. His banker, Mrs. Patricia Wells, had prepared a complete transaction history that made my stomach turn. The account had $47,000 in January, she explained. As of yesterday, the balance was $3,200. Mrs. Henderson has been making daily withdrawals using the debit card, always staying just under the $500 limit that would trigger additional verification. She handed me printouts of the withdrawal history. Every single transaction corresponded with Stephanie's social media posts about shopping, dining, or entertainment. While Michael worked extra shifts and worried about money, she was systematically draining their savings $400 to $500 at a time. The most concerning pattern, Mrs. Wells continued, is that the withdrawals increased dramatically after Mr. Henderson's health problems began. Instead of preserving money for medical expenses, Mrs. Henderson accelerated her spending. How is that possible if Michael was monitoring the account? Mrs. Henderson convinced him to stop checking the online banking because it was causing him stress. She told him she would handle all financial monitoring and provide him with monthly summaries. But the monthly summaries were lies. Stephanie had been showing Michael fabricated statements that showed their savings growing while she drained the account. He'd been working himself into exhaustion, thinking he was building financial security while she spent every penny. Mrs. Wells, effective immediately. I'm freezing this account under the power of attorney provisions, Robert announced. Only Margaret Henderson will have access until Michael recovers. Of course, the freeze is already in place. Next came the devastating discovery of Stephanie's secret credit card accounts. The investigation had revealed that she'd opened 3 credit cards in Michael's name without his knowledge, using his excellent credit score to secure high limits. The total debt across these 3 cards is $84,000. Explained the credit investigator Robert had hired. All charges are for luxury items, travel, and entertainment. There's no evidence that Michael benefited from any of these purchases, or even knew the accounts existed. She'd been living a completely separate financial life, funded by my son's credit, while convincing him they were struggling financially. The woman I'd watched cry crocodile tears about being unable to afford his medical care had been carrying designer handbags that cost more than his monthly salary. The most damaging evidence is this email chain we recovered from one of the credit card company's customer service systems, the investigator continued. Mrs. Henderson contacted them last month asking about increasing the credit limits because her husband's medical situation might require expensive treatments not covered by insurance. She'd used Michael's life-threatening illness as justification to secure more credit that she intended to spend on herself. Even facing the possibility of losing him, her first instinct was to figure out how to extract more money from the situation. There's more, Robert said grimly. Margaret, you need to know about the life insurance investigation. He pulled out a folder marked confidential. I contacted the insurance company to understand the benefit changes. According to their records, Mrs. Henderson called twice after reducing Michael's coverage. Once to ask about suicide clauses and waiting periods, and once to inquire about how deaths from medication allergies are classified. The room fell silent. Everyone present understood the implication. Stephanie hadn't just been negligent about Michael's health care. She'd been researching how his death might be profitable for her. Jesus, I whispered. She was hoping he would die. It gets worse. The investigator I hired found evidence that she's been having an affair for over 8 months. Her phone records show daily communication with a man named Derek Carstairs, including location data that proves they've been meeting regularly at hotels. He showed me photographs taken by the private investigator, Stephanie entering expensive hotels with a tall, dark-haired man, the two of them dining at restaurants that cost more than Michael's weekly salary, photos of them shopping together, with Derek carrying bags from stores that Michael could never afford. She's been funding this relationship with money stolen from Michael, I said, the pieces falling into place. Yes, and according to the financial analysis, she's spent approximately $130,000 on this affair over the past 8 months. Money that came from Michael's savings, his credit, and the healthcare funds that should have been protecting his life. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I struggled to process it. This wasn't a wife overwhelmed by her husband's illness. This was a predator who had methodically destroyed my son's health, finances, and security while planning to profit from his death. Robert, what are our next steps? We've already implemented the financial protections. As of this morning, Stephanie has no access to any of Michael's accounts, insurance policies, or credit. She's been removed as beneficiary on all policies, and you've been restored as primary beneficiary as Michael originally intended. What happens when she tries to access the money? Her debit card will be declined. Her credit cards have been frozen due to suspected fraud. If she tries to make any claims on Michael's insurance or benefits, she'll be directed to speak with legal counsel. I felt a grim satisfaction imagining Stephanie's shock when her financial pipeline suddenly ran dry. But there was still one more revelation that Robert had saved for last. Margaret, there's something else you need to know. The private investigator discovered that Stephanie has been meeting with a lawyer about divorce proceedings. She's been planning to leave Michael, but only after his death, or after securing the maximum possible financial settlement. He handed me copies of emails between Stephanie and her attorney. The consultation notes were chilling in their calculation. Divorce strategy. If husband recovers, claim mental distress from caregiving responsibilities and seek maximum alimony and asset division. If husband dies, collect life insurance and inheritance as widow, then pursue wrongful death claims against medical providers. She'd been planning to destroy Michael financially whether he lived or died. If he survived his health crisis, she would have divorced him and taken half of everything he'd worked for. If he died, she would have collected his life insurance and then sued the doctors for malpractice. There's one final piece, Robert said. Her lawyer's notes indicate that she's already received a retainer fee to represent her in either divorce or wrongful death proceedings. Guess where that money came from? I didn't need to guess. It had come from Michael's accounts. Money he'd earned working extra shifts while fighting for his life. Money he thought was being saved for their future together. As the meeting concluded and the various professionals gathered their documents, I felt a strange calm settling over me. For 6 weeks, I'd been watching my son fight for his life, while his wife performed grief and devotion for an audience. Now I knew the truth. Stephanie hadn't just been neglecting Michael, she'd been actively trying to kill him, but her plan had one fatal flaw. She'd forgotten that Michael had protected himself 3 years ago by giving his mother the power to override every single one of her manipulations. Tomorrow, when Stephanie tried to access the money she'd been stealing, she would discover that her victim had become unreachable. And the day after that, she would learn that her crimes hadn't gone unnoticed. The predator was about to become the prey. 2 months after that devastating phone call changed my life, I was sitting beside Michael's bed, reading aloud from his favorite mystery novel when Stephanie burst through the ICU doors like a woman possessed. Her usually perfect composure was completely shattered, her hair disheveled, and her designer clothes wrinkled as if she'd slept in them. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice carrying across the quiet ward and drawing stares from nurses and other families. I looked up calmly from the book, though my heart was racing. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "I'm sorry. What are you referring to?" "Don't play innocent with me, Margaret. My cards aren't working. I can't access our accounts. The insurance company says they can't discuss anything with me. What the hell did you do?" I carefully marked my place in the book and set it aside. 2 nurses had moved closer, clearly sensing the tension, and I was grateful for their presence. I activated the legal protections that Michael put in place 3 years ago. The ones that give me authority over his medical and financial affairs while he's incapacitated. "You had no right!" The volume of her voice caused one of the nurses to step forward. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice. This is an intensive care unit." Stephanie whirled around to face the nurse. "This woman has stolen my husband's money. She's locked me out of everything." "Stephanie," I said quietly, "perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." "No, I want answers now. You've ruined everything." The words hung in the air like an admission of guilt, not "you've hurt our family" or "you've made things difficult." She'd said I'd ruined everything, as if my protection of Michael's interests had destroyed some plan she'd been carefully executing. "Mrs. Henderson," the head nurse said firmly, "I'm going to need you to either calm down or leave the ICU. You're disturbing other patients and families." Stephanie's eyes darted around the room, seeming to realize for the first time that she'd become the center of unwanted attention. Several family members were staring openly, and I could see phones being discreetly raised to record her outburst. "Fine," she said, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. But this isn't over, Margaret. Michael is my husband, and when he wakes up, he'll fix whatever damage you've done. Actually, I said, standing slowly and meeting her gaze, when Michael wakes up, he's going to learn some very interesting things about what you've been doing while he's been fighting for his life. Something flickered across her face that might have been fear, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I've done nothing wrong. I've been here every day, supporting my husband through this crisis. Supporting him? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Stephanie, you've been here for an average of 90 minutes per day, and most of that time has been spent taking selfies for social media. The nurses have been documenting your visits. She glanced nervously at the nurses, who were now watching our exchange with obvious interest. Hospital staff see everything, and I could tell from their expressions that they'd formed their own opinions about Stephanie's devotion. I've been coping the best way I know how, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. By canceling his health insurance and spending his savings on designer clothes, the accusation hit her like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, her face going white. That's not what happened. Then explain to me why Michael's insurance was canceled in January by someone claiming to be calling on his behalf. Explain why his savings account went from $47,000 to $3,200 while he was working extra shifts thinking he was building financial security. Several people in the ICU had stopped pretending not to listen. This was clearly more dramatic than anything they'd expected to witness during their own family vigils. The insurance was too expensive, Stephanie said weakly. We agreed to self-pay. Michael never agreed to anything because you never told him. You lied to him about the costs, canceled the coverage, and pocketed the money, while he was having chest pains and begging you to let him see a cardiologist. Stephanie's eyes were darting around frantically now, looking for an escape route. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Managing our finances during this difficult time. Managing them by spending $84,000 on credit cards Michael didn't know existed? Managing them by funding an 8-month affair with Derek Carstairs using money stolen from my son? The name Derek hit her like a slap. She went completely still, and I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew and how I'd found out. I don't know who told you that, but your phone records told me. Hotel receipts told me. The private investigator's photographs told me. Your consultation with a divorce attorney told me. I paused, letting the weight of evidence sink in. Your research into Michael's life insurance policies and suicide clauses told me everything I needed to know about your intentions. She was trapped, and she knew it. I could see the exact moment when she realized that her carefully constructed facade had crumbled completely. Her shoulders sagged, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. You don't understand what it's been like. What's been like? Stealing from a man who loved you? Denying him medical care while you lived like a queen? Planning to profit from his death? He was supposed to get better. The words burst out of her like a confession. The doctors said the heart condition was manageable with medication. I thought I could just manage things until he was stable again. Manage things by hoping he would die? No, maybe. I don't know. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration at being caught. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who's always worried about money? Who wants to save every penny for some theoretical future emergency? I'm 32 years old, Margaret. I deserve to enjoy my life. You deserve to enjoy life that you're stealing from my son? I earned that money too. Do you think it's easy being married to Michael? He's obsessive about everything. His health, his finances, his work. Living with that anxiety is exhausting. I stared at her, finally understanding the depth of her selfishness. In her mind, Michael's responsible nature and health concerns weren't admirable qualities, but inconveniences that justified her theft and betrayal. So, you decided to solve the problem by making sure he didn't live long enough to worry about anything. I never wanted him to die. I just wanted him to stop being so controlling about money. By canceling his health insurance and preventing him from seeing doctors. By showing him that we could afford to live a little. If he'd just relaxed about the medical expenses, none of this would have happened. The twisted logic was breathtaking. She'd created the very crisis she claimed to be solving, then blamed Michael for the consequences of her actions. "Stephanie," I said, my voice steady despite the rage coursing through me. "Michael is lying in that bed because you convinced him he couldn't afford medical care while you were spending thousands of dollars on yourself every month. His allergic reaction was complicated by an undiagnosed heart condition that could have been treated if you hadn't stolen his healthcare money. I didn't steal anything. That money was as much mine as his. Actually, it wasn't. Michael earned every penny of that money working overtime shifts because you convinced him your family needed the extra income. You were never employed during your marriage, so every dollar you spent was money he earned believing he was providing for your shared future." The fight seemed to go out of her then. She looked around the ICU, seeming to realize that everyone present had witnessed her confession to financial abuse, insurance fraud, and emotional manipulation. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now you leave. Security will escort you out, and you won't be allowed back into this ICU. If you try to contact Michael when he recovers, you'll be arrested for harassment. You can't do that. I'm his wife. You're his wife who researched suicide clauses in his life insurance policy while denying him medical care. You're his wife who spent over $130,000 of his money on an affair while he worked himself into a medical crisis. You're his wife who positioned herself to profit from his death while actively making that death more likely." I signaled to the security guards who had been summoned by the nursing staff. "You're done here, Stephanie. You're done with Michael, done with his money, and done with this family." As the security guards approached, Stephanie made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Michael will never believe this. When he wakes up, I'll tell him you made everything up because you never liked me." I smiled at her then, a sad, pitying smile. "Stephanie, when Michael wakes up, he's going to see every bank statement, every credit card bill, every phone record, and every insurance document. He's going to see the photos of you with Derek. He's going to read your emails about divorce strategy and life insurance payouts." Her face went ashen as the full implications hit her. "Most importantly," I continued, "he's going to see the letter he wrote to me 6 months ago but never sent. The letter where he talked about being afraid to seek medical care because you'd convinced him they couldn't afford it. The letter where he apologized for being a burden and promised to try to manage his health problems on his own." That final revelation broke her completely. She understood that Michael himself had documented her manipulation, creating evidence that no amount of lies could overcome. As security escorted her toward the exit, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Margaret." "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." After she was gone, the ICU slowly returned to its usual quiet rhythm, but I could feel the weight of stares from other families, and I knew that Stephanie's public breakdown had created questions that would spread throughout the hospital. A nurse approached me as I settled back into my chair beside Michael's bed. "Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that the staff has been concerned about Mrs. Henderson's behavior for weeks. We're relieved that someone finally stood up to her." "What do you mean?" "She's been treating your son's illness like a social media opportunity. Taking photos with him unconscious, posting about being a devoted wife while barely spending time here. It's been disturbing to watch." I nodded, understanding that Stephanie's performance had fooled no one except possibly herself. As I picked up the mystery novel to continue reading to Michael, I felt a profound sense of relief. The predator who had been slowly killing my son was gone. The money she'd stolen was secured. The insurance that should have been protecting him was restored. Most importantly, when Michael opened his eyes, he would be surrounded by people who genuinely loved him, not someone calculating how to profit from his suffering. The truth had finally emerged, and justice, while delayed, was finally within reach. 3 months after that phone call that changed everything, I was reading the morning newspaper when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. My son's voice, weak but unmistakably his own, saying, "Mom?" I dropped the paper and leaned over his hospital bed, tears streaming down my face as I saw Michael's eyes open and focused for the first time since his collapse. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." His voice was barely a whisper, made rough by weeks of intubation. "What happened? How long have I been here? How long?" "You had a severe allergic reaction that triggered cardiac complications. You've been unconscious for almost 3 months. I squeezed his hand gently, feeling the strength slowly returning to his grip. 3 months? He tried to sit up, but was too weak. Where's Stephanie? Is she okay? The question I'd been dreading. I'd rehearsed this conversation countless times, but now that the moment was here, I struggled to find the right words. Michael, there are some things we need to talk about, but first, let me get Dr. Collins. She'll want to examine you. Over the next several hours, as doctors ran tests and confirmed that Michael's recovery was progressing better than anyone had dared hope, I prepared myself for the most difficult conversation of my life. How do you tell someone that the person they trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying them? Dr. Collins was optimistic about his prognosis. The cardiac damage is minimal and should heal completely with proper medication and lifestyle changes. The allergic reaction seems to have been triggered by a combination of factors, including untreated stress and an underlying heart condition that we're now managing properly. Untreated stress? Michael asked, confusion clear in his voice. Your mother can explain more about the circumstances, Dr. Collins said diplomatically. The important thing is that you're going to make a full recovery. That evening, when the medical staff had finished their assessments and we were alone, Michael asked the question again. Mom, where's Stephanie? Why hasn't she been here? I took a deep breath and pulled out the folder I'd been keeping beside his bed for weeks. Michael, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, but I need you to understand what's been happening while you've been unconscious. I started with the basics, how I'd found him alone in the ICU while Stephanie was at a charity gala, her pattern of brief performative visits, and the mounting medical bills that insurance should have covered. With each revelation, I watched my son's expression change from confusion to disbelief, to a kind of devastated recognition. She canceled my insurance? His voice was stronger now, fueled by growing anger. But she told me the premiums had gone up, that we needed to save money for the higher costs. She lied to you, sweetheart. She canceled the insurance and kept the money you thought you were paying in premiums. I showed him the bank statements, the timeline of withdrawals corresponding to her social media posts. Michael studied the documents with the same methodical attention to detail that had made him successful in his accounting career. I could see him processing the numbers, understanding the scope of the betrayal. $47,000, he said quietly. We had $47,000 in savings? You did. You earned it working those extra shifts, thinking you were building security for your family. And she spent it all? Every penny. Plus, she opened credit cards in your name that you didn't know about. The total debt is over $80,000. He closed his eyes, and I could see him remembering conversations, arguments, moments when Stephanie had convinced him they couldn't afford things that were actually well within their budget. The cardiologist. When I wanted to see the cardiologist about my chest pains, she told you it was too expensive. But she bought a $3,000 handbag that same week. I saw the charge on the credit card, and she said it was an investment piece that would hold its value. His laugh was bitter. I believed her. I actually felt guilty for wanting to spend money on my health when she was being so financially responsible. This was the hardest part, watching him realize how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. I showed him the evidence gradually, letting him process each piece before moving to the next. The fake insurance statements she'd shown him. The credit cards opened in his name. The research into his life insurance policies. She was planning for me to die? The question was barely audible. Michael, I think she was hoping for it. She reduced your life insurance coverage and named herself as the sole beneficiary. She researched suicide clauses and accidental death benefits, all while denying you the medical care that could have prevented this crisis. I pulled out the most damaging evidence, printouts of her text conversations with Derek, photos of them together, records of the money spent on their affair. 8 months, he said, staring at a photo of Stephanie and Derek in an expensive restaurant. She's been cheating on me for 8 months while I worked myself into the ground trying to pay for her lifestyle. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you had to learn all this while you're recovering. He was quiet for a long time, studying the evidence with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent years analyzing financial documents for fraud. Finally, he looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than they had 3 months ago. Mom, how did you know to investigate all this? How did you get access to everything? Do you remember those power of attorney documents you asked me to sign 3 years ago? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. My paranoia about having proper documentation. Your paranoia saved your life, Michael. And it gave me the authority to protect you when you couldn't protect yourself. Over the next several days, as Michael's strength slowly returned, we worked through the practical aspects of rebuilding his life. His insurance had been reinstated, covering all the medical bills. The stolen money had been recovered where possible, and the fraudulent credit cards had been canceled. Stephanie had been permanently banned from the hospital and served with papers beginning divorce proceedings. "Where is she now?" he asked one afternoon. "Living with Derek, apparently. Her lawyer contacted Robert to discuss a settlement, but there won't be one. She forfeited any claim to your assets when she committed fraud and attempted to defraud the insurance companies. And the criminal charges? The district attorney is reviewing the evidence. Financial fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft. She's looking at serious prison time if convicted." Michael nodded, and I could see him processing the reality that the woman he'd loved and trusted had committed felonies against him. "I should feel worse about this," he said eventually. "About my marriage ending, about her going to prison. But I just feel relieved." Relieved? For months I felt like I was losing my mind. I was working constantly but never seemed to have enough money. I was having health problems but felt guilty about spending money on medical care. I thought I was failing as a husband, failing to provide for our future. He paused, looking out the window at the city beyond. "Now I understand that I wasn't failing. I was being sabotaged by someone who was supposed to love and protect me." The physical healing happened gradually over the following weeks. Michael's heart condition stabilized with proper medication. His strength returned as the stress that had been slowly killing him was removed from his life. But the emotional healing would take much longer. "I keep thinking about signs I should have seen," he told me one day as we walked slowly around the hospital's rehabilitation center. "The way she'd get angry when I wanted to check our bank balance. How she always had reasons why we couldn't afford things for me, but somehow managed to afford expensive things for herself. She was very good at manipulation, Michael. That's not a reflection of your intelligence or judgment. It's a reflection of her character. But how did I not notice that she was having an affair? 8 months, Mom. For 8 months, she was sleeping with another man while I was working myself sick trying to make her happy. This was the deepest wound, I realized. Not just the financial betrayal or even the medical neglect, but the fundamental violation of trust that comes with infidelity. The knowledge that while he'd been sacrificing his health and happiness for their marriage, she'd been building a completely separate life with someone else. Michael, people who are capable of that level of deception are also very good at hiding it. She compartmentalized everything, her affair, her spending, her lies about your finances. She was living multiple lives simultaneously. 1 month after he'd awakened, Michael was finally ready to leave the hospital. As we packed his belongings, he came across the notebook where I'd been documenting everything during his unconsciousness. "You wrote down everything," he said, flipping through pages of observations, conversations with doctors, and evidence I'd gathered about Stephanie's behavior. "I wanted you to understand what happened. I wanted there to be a record." He read for several minutes, absorbing the day-by-day account of his fight for survival and his wife's betrayal. When he finished, he set the notebook down and hugged me with more strength than he'd had since before his collapse. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for staying with me, for protecting me, for being the mother I needed when I couldn't take care of myself." As we left Mount Sinai together for the first time in 4 months, I felt a profound sense of completion. My son was alive, healthy, and free from the predator who had been slowly destroying him. The legal system would handle Stephanie's crimes, but the important work was done. "What happens now?" Michael asked as we drove toward his apartment, which I'd been maintaining in his absence. "Now you rebuild. You focus on your health, your career, your happiness. You learn to trust again, starting with trusting yourself. And you? Are you going back to Connecticut?" I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. My life in Connecticut felt like it belonged to a different person, someone who didn't know what her daughter-in-law was capable of, someone who trusted that family members would protect each other. "I think I might stay in New York for a while, if that's okay with you. I've gotten used to being close by." He smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him since he'd awakened. "I'd like that, Mom. I'd like that a lot." 6 months later, I was reading in my new apartment just 10 blocks from Michael's when my phone rang. But this time, it wasn't a call that made my heart race with fear. It was Michael, calling to tell me about his new job, his improving health, and the woman he'd met in his cardiac rehabilitation program, who was kind, honest, and completely transparent about her finances. Life, it seemed, was finally moving forward instead of just surviving. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful healing of all.